Hello, and welcome to week 2 of Information Sources and Services. This week we're going to look a little bit at the history of reference, and I'm going to give you an introduction to reference, introducing some of the things that we're going to be going over during the course of the semester. Megan Harper, in the chapters that I've given you to read, does a nice job of detailing milestones in library history in her first chapter, and I'm not going to repeat that, but I just wanted to mention a few that she didn't mention in her talk, in her chapter. So in 1740, Ben Franklin acknowledged the fact that school libraries were a key element in an ideal academy. In 1744, in the Penn Charter School, there was a room designated as a library. In 1833, the first free public library was opened in Peterborough, New Hampshire. And this was distinguished from other libraries in that there were libraries before this, but they tended to be subscription libraries where you actually had to pay in order to use the library. It might be a nominal fee, but there was some kind of payment, and you joined as a member and were then able to borrow. This library is considered the first one that was subsidized and paid for by tax dollars and free to anybody in the town to use. Some other people have claims to it, but this seems to be the library that I've most often seen declared the first free public library. In 1876, the American Library Association was founded. There was a meeting of people who became instrumental to the development of libraries, mostly public libraries, but also school libraries. Eventually, school libraries became part of ALA, but this was how far back ALA goes. In 1887, the first library school, teaching mostly women how to be librarians, was opened at Columbia University by Melville Dewey, I believe, and this was the first time that there were actual courses in librarianship, although they tended to be more to the clerk. Mostly it was women, because men tended to be the directors of libraries and supposedly didn't need library training for that. But they trained women in how to use the Dewey Decimal System, which was just being created then, how to write in library hand, which was a clear kind of script that you needed to write in, and other such niceties for libraries. Between 1890 and 1900, children are for the first time given spaces in public libraries. So while the Free Public Library was founded way back in 1833, the first one, often children under 12 or 14 were not really welcome in libraries, and when they were first given spaces, they were given spaces to stay out of the way of the who they considered the true patrons, the adult users. So somewhere around 1890, they started to get spaces, and then librarians began understanding how important it was to use these spaces to cultivate children's reading and information use. And about 1900, you have the first professionally trained school librarian. I don't know which school she went to, but you start to see even though it was a school library back in 1744 in the Penn Charter School, it wasn't normal to necessarily have school libraries and obviously not professionally trained school librarians before 1900. So, let me just see. So from the 1900s on, there's been many changes since we have our first children's spaces opening and trained children's and school librarians. There have been many changes in technology and culture that have affected libraries. In the early part of the century, librarians focused on getting what they called good books into the hands of children. Not only children, adults also. Librarians actively worked to limit the reading of fiction unless books were moral and demonstrated appropriate social norms. There was, we couldn't read a book about something bad happening in a family, like not that children would read this, but if there was something negative going on, there had to be consequences, so they could teach them morals and see the moral way of that life was supposed to be lived. As Harper notes, going forward to the 1960s, there was an influx of money to libraries as part of the effort to spur scientific progress. More recently, we've seen the challenge of changing formats, although this is really began much longer ago than we like to think of. You think about microfiche, which seems like an ancient technology now, was the cutting edge for a while, and there's still a lot. If you do historical research, there's still a lot that's only available on microfiche. It hasn't been digitized necessarily. When I did some of the historical research for my dissertation, I was looking at microfiche. Now we have Google, and students want instant gratification. If they can't find the answer the second they put that search term into Google, they don't care. They get frustrated, and they don't care if it's right or not. It just shows up in Google. If Google gives them an answer, it must be good. But not everything can be found on Google. As we'll talk about later, the breadth of the internet is such that Google can only track about 10% of it, or maybe even less. So when you're Googling something, it's not necessarily looking at everything, all the information that's out there. So along with wanting instant gratification and not covering everything that's out there, we need to help students understand how to search, to evaluate what they find on Google, and to choose the best source to use for their project. And this, I think, is why we need librarians, and how we can help students now, along with promoting reading and helping them with research, but helping them with research and helping them understand what is quality information and what's not quality information. So there's several types of reference that you would do as a reference when you're doing a reference, when you're helping them with information sources and services, being a reference librarian. Ready reference is quick answers to questions that don't require in-depth research. And there used to be, in the reference section of the library, a lot of things that were there for ready reference. So when you wanted to find out how tall the Eiffel Tower is, or what was Babe Ruth's batting average, what does a full-grown elephant weigh, now we would just go into Google and hopefully get the right answer. And even in ready reference, we need to be careful that the source that you're getting it from is dependable. But there used to be a almanac. We're going to talk about some of these sources: almanacs and dictionaries and dictionaries of subjects, etc., etc. Encyclopedias even help with ready reference. So you probably will get fewer ready reference questions than somebody working pre-Google would have been doing in a day. But it's still something that you need to know what it is and how to help people with it. Personally, going to Google is fine. If somebody needs an answer to a question that's a ready reference, if I wanted to know what Babe Ruth's batting average is, I would certainly go on Google. I would just make sure that I was looking at a reputable source. Then there's research, which is helping students with by guiding them to the sources that they need, often necessitating a reference interview. We'll talk more about what a reference interview is in future classes. And this will actually help prepare you for your reference interview paper that you're going to be doing, because you're going to be going in to a library and asking basically for help with research. So you're not going to ask a ready reference question where they just direct you to Google. We're going to develop a question that helps, that allows room for the reference librarian to lead you to appropriate sources. And we're going to look at how well they do that. And then finally, reader's advisory, which can be really the most fun type of reference question, especially when it means helping students find books they really want to read. Not just a book that fits the requirements for a reading assignment, which might be a 100-page book, a certain AR level, a biography, or realistic fiction. Although finding something that piques a student's interest within those requirements can be also an exciting challenge. It's interesting because the most common type of question at the reference desk is actually directional. Where is, and in the public libraries, this is usually where's the bathroom, where's the copier, where's the meeting room, or even where do I find new books, where do I find nonfiction. They might just want a general guiding point in a direction. Because they want to explore themselves. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to know when they want to explore themselves and how to know when you need to help. In Harper's book, she mentions state online homework helplines, and New Jersey used to have one sponsored by the state library, but unfortunately the funding was cut and it's no longer available. You might find your districts may decide to make available something like that for your students. Right now, and I haven't checked, it was available last semester. I didn't hear that it was going away, but we have tutor.com available through Cheng Library, not for your students, but for you as students, to help with questions and of various sorts. So it's kind of like a homework helpline for, particularly for Cheng, for college students. And by Cheng, I mean the Cheng Library here at William Patterson. So reference work, Harper makes a distinction between reference work and reference transactions. And we will turn to talking about the reference transaction next week. But reference work includes a really broader array of responsibilities, some of which and many of which are not visible to the user. So it includes selecting materials, organizing materials, curating, which I didn't put on here, but is part of the new standards. So you might be developing something like the LibGuide that we're going to do, or you can curate print, or you can curate in online in non-print, digitally. Word. You can curate material for students to use, give them an overview. What the LibGuide is going to do is you're going to organize or curate a set of materials around one topic or theme. And so you're helping the students and the teachers by giving them materials in one place that makes it easier for them to use. Reference work also includes information literacy, which is teaching students and teachers sometimes how to use information, how to evaluate, how to find it, how to use it it can include plagiarism, copyright, presentations, etc. So information literacy we're going to be talking about in a later lecture and ways to teach it. Some of the reference tools you might use include research guides, pathfinders, LibGuides, that kind of thing, and library catalogs, databases, websites. These are all tools that you have to come to know in order to use them. You have to become familiar with them in order to use them to do a reference transaction, which includes helping students find the information that they need. I wanted to talk a little bit about school and public library cooperation, as this could be part of your job. I found I did work on Newark Public Library from 1880 to 1920. I was reading their annual reports as part of my dissertation and looking at how they were helping immigrants, but in the course of reading their annual reports and other information, I discovered that the schools in Newark did not have, around the 1885, 1890, did not have school libraries. I think there was one school that might have had a small school library. So what the public library did was create boxes of 40 to 50 books and circulate them among the different schools in Newark. So these boxes traveled to schools, and it increased in circulation through the 1910s. I continued to see they would develop specialized box. They would basically curate a box of material if a school requested it around an assignment and send that box out. They continued to increase the number of boxes they had going out, both fiction and nonfiction, so that every school would have them. They would change who had them, change circulation. Sometimes around the 1910s is when it kind of topped out. I haven't read, it's one of my things I want to do, I haven't read the Board of Ed minutes to look at the development of school libraries, but I'm assuming that since the circulation was topping out around the 1910s and then started to drop a little, that school libraries were coming into their own at that point within the schools. So this was an early example of school and public library cooperation within New Jersey. Today it can be difficult. In a lot of times what happens is that the public librarian and the school librarian might not necessarily talk, and so you've got even within the school, this can be a problem, not knowing what the assignments are. So you're a school librarian and one of the teachers doesn't let you know that they're going to be having their class do an assignment on the planets, and so they come in and you didn't know this assignment was coming up, you don't have the books pulled, all of a sudden you're getting the same question over and over again, you didn't realize it was a school assignment with the first one, you let a bunch of books go out, you don't have materials. Although not having enough materials doesn't happen as much now that a lot of material is digital, but still there might be some material that you would like to know ahead of time, or that you would like to have known. This is why being part of the curriculum committee can be important, so you know what's going to be studied in the school. Take one step back from the school and you're in the public library, as I was, and you have no idea what's coming in, and you might not be able to you might not have the information for them, or you might not understand. A lot of times students may not understand what the assignment is. One of my first independent reference questions on the children's reference desk in a public library had to do, a young kid came in and asked about EC-NICI. Had no paperwork. I had never heard of it before. Some of you probably have because you're in schools, but I hadn't worked in the schools necessarily. I didn't know what it was, and I was going crazy. She didn't know how to spell it. She didn't know anything about it. Finally told me it had something to do with the Japanese. Finally figured out that it has to do with first and second Japanese immigrant status. I think I went to the adult reference librarian who had a lot of years of experience and was able to help me. But this happens, and so it can be helpful if there's school and public library cooperation, so both of them know what the teachers are assigning and you guys can help each other out. There are even some, do I mention that here? There are some libraries, some ideas of recent trends, and it kind of goes back to old ideas too, of combining public and school libraries in the school building, which is interesting and can work, but can also be problematic. So it'll be interesting to watch where that trend goes. Actually, my kids where my son first went to school, that was the case in the town we were in, and that was almost 27 years ago. So it's not something new, but it's when budgets become tough, it becomes talked about again. Also, there's a kind of a bigger cooperation among libraries in that there's several state-paid databases available for school, public, and academic libraries, and they're paid for through the New Jersey State Library at no cost. Anybody who has a library card from a public library should be able to access these databases online using their library card number. And now they're supposed to be, if you are in the state and you sign on to the databases that are available. It's New Jersey Clicks, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. It recognizes your IP is in the state and will allow you in. That's supposed to be the latest advances in those databases, but they can be a good way to expand your databases without spending money. So, developmentally appropriate reference, I just want to mention it because it's one of the chapters I'm having you read in Harper. Of course, different ages have different needs in terms of how you approach them, what language you use, and as a librarian, you're going to have to understand a broader range of ages than you might have just having one classroom. Of course, within one classroom, there's different needs and different ages, but you're going to, say you're in a K-5 school, you're going to need to understand how to work with different ages and what their different needs are and what their different understandings are of databases and of searching and of using information, because obviously they're not going to walk into school as kindergartners knowing all of this. And so some of what we cover later on, we'll talk about how to approach that. But just be aware that, I mean, it's a no-brainer, but different ages are going to need different things. The other thing that's really important is a consistent opening and welcoming attitude. We were just talking about this the other day, that I hopefully try to practice that as a director of the department, in that I try to always have a open and welcoming, email me and I will try to answer you in as full and welcoming, and hopefully you get a good vibe from me. And that's what you want to do as a librarian. You want to have a consistently opening and welcoming attitude, because you want them coming into the library. You want to make it a place they want to be, because it's not always you might have had, all it takes is one negative interaction with a librarian, and I'm not saying that we have to be perfect every day, but if you have one librarian who's super negative and you have terrible experiences with her, you're going to have perhaps a negative image of the library for the rest of your life, and you don't want that. Also, to go back to different needs, you need to have multiple access points for accessing information, and we'll stress this later on, but some students might be better visual learners, some students might be better oral learners, some might be better learning from reading or tactile. So you need to think about this as you develop your collection and as you offer them resources, because you might need to be aware, you need to get to know your students and help them find multiple access to information. And there's also some gender differences that are quite strongly articulated that we have to be very careful of, particularly that boys will be more likely to read nonfiction and girls read fiction. And we need to not assume that a female patron is automatically looking for something interesting to read, is automatically looking for fiction, nor do we need to assume that a boy will only read boy books with boys on the cover, or boys as main characters. That's something we are trying desperately to get away from, and just be open to the fact that it's really dependent on the individual kid. And this is part of your reference interview and interactions, reference transaction. When we talk about conducting a reference interview, part of that is asking questions, but those questions need to be at an appropriate age for your for the developmentally appropriate levels for who you're dealing with. And we'll look at this more. I keep referring to the reference interview, but we will take a more in-depth look at the reference interview later on, which basically is just the interaction between you and a librarian when you're looking for information of some sort. Special needs students, some adaptations are beneficial to all students and beneficial to students with different learning styles. And as Harper states, they should be used as a matter of course. So assistive technologies are good. There are many times I wish I had a screen magnifier. It can be helpful for all ages. And the software itself can help if you don't have money for other types of assistive technologies, making sure students know how to make the fonts larger within various programs. New Jersey offers additional services to students with special needs, and your reference journal assignment will introduce you to one such institution that can help with materials for students with special needs when it comes to accessing information, to reading and listening to books and material. And it's important to make the library a low-stress environment for all students, not just for special needs students, but for all students. When they talk about, I was reading about design the other day, and they were talking about having spaces in a mall, I think, for people to go to when they're overstimulated. I was thinking, geez, I could use that. Sometimes when I'm in when you're in a crowd, you just might need to step away for a minute. Some people don't. Some people are, energized by all that energy, but not everybody is, and it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with special needs, but just your reaction to what's going on around us. So when rearranging library spaces or developing new spaces, make sure you consult with an expert so that the design works for everyone. They talk about things that you can do within your own house, because we're replacing, when we did some remodeling and we replaced all of our knobs that, the round knobs that you have to turn with levers, because they're easier for everyone to use. And actually I was somewhere the other day and I was like, gosh, I wish this had a lever, because I was carrying something in with, I had my hands full, and I was like, if I just had a lever, I could use my elbow and get in easier. But, as we get older, and I find that my hands are not as strong, and opening that door is not easy for everybody. So this is something that, things like this that we can think about when developing environments for our students that help everyone. They're not necessarily just for those special needs students. And Harper has some excellent tables in her book on information on ways to assist students with resources for more information. And basically the goal is to make information easier for all students to access. So finally, I want to talk about your journals. This is going to be something we're doing throughout the semester. I think I mentioned them briefly last week. We're going to do one per week. We'll start the first one this week. I'm going to give you a reference question. This is my way of having you practice some of the skills that we're going to talk about during the week, particularly searching skills that we're going to talk about, but other kinds of reference skills. They're going to be private between you and I. Other students can't see them. I have a reference journal link, and if you just go into the reference journal, and I'll link to it from the tab for this week, and just answer the question. And sometimes it'll be results that you can copy and paste in, or I'll ask you to think of, comment on what you found. This week we're going to be looking at comparing different search engines, and so I'll be asking you to reflect on which ones were more useful to you and why, or how you would use them. So I post the question at the beginning. I'd like you to have them answered by the end of the week. If you have a week that you can't get to it, it's fine. If it's going to be really late, let me know. But we'll have one, I believe, every week until the last week of the semester. So the first journal will be, like I said, this week, and you guys can do that. And if you have any questions about how to do the journal, let me know. I will try to get to them right after this week to let you know, give you a comment on how on the posting. And this is a picture of one of my favorite library to movies that have as a librarian in it, and that's Katharine Hepburn in Desk Set. It's a great Christmas movie if you haven't watched it. And it talks about new technologies affecting reference. So it's a perfect movie to watch. All right, that's it for this week, and we will see you on the discussion board. Thanks.